Welcome to Have You Heard with Heather Darling. I'm Heather Darling and today's guest is Hector Garcia. Hector was born in Havana, Cuba, April 10, 1960, and his family immigrated to Spain in 1970, Costa Rica in 1972, Puerto Rico in 1973, and then finally to the United States in 1977. Hector graduated from Patterson Catholic High School in 1979. During school and thereafter, he worked in supermarkets and moved his way up from a stock clerk to the store manager. Later, he went into business in January 1997, forming a partnership with an existing sales and marketing company, J&J Sales Company, based in Connecticut. Additionally, from 1995 to 2012, he was an entrepreneur for HBO Sports. Welcome, Hector.
Well, thank you.
It's great to have you back on the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So last time you were here, we talked about the conditions in Cuba. And this time we're going to talk a little bit more about your life, compared and contrasted what it is today and what it would have been if you were in Cuba. So first of all, what you've achieved here in America. If your father had not taken your family from Cuba, could you have achieved anything close to what you've done here in America?
Oh, it's impossible. I would have never come anywhere near what I have accomplished here in the United States. My parents came out here looking for the American dream, that opportunity to get ahead in life and give my brother and I education, and they accomplished that. There was no way they could have done that in Cuba. Absolutely not.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. In Cuba, education is free.
That's correct. It's free for everyone, but what good does it do you? You go to medical school, you become a doctor, but then you can't practice. There's no medicine, there's no equipment, the hospitals are in shambles. The poverty level is so big. Everything it's not like here. Everything's so sanitized, and there is just a mess. And there's no way you can become a lawyer, but then a lawyer for what? Who are you going to defend? All kinds of different positions and jobs and careers that you can pursue, but there's nothing there. You graduate with great grades, but there's nothing you can do with it.
Are the schools good?
As I understand, the schools are very good. There's medicine or doctors are very, very good, but there's nothing that can do with it.
So when you graduate, if you got a medical degree, which you didn't, but if you were in Cuba and you got a medical degree, are there jobs even available?
90% of the Cuban population works for the government.
Okay. So
you're talking about big government. That's as big as you can get a government. So you are limited to the little bit that the government gives you. It's close to misery. That's all they have to live on, whatever the government gives you, which is very little. Now, the bigger, the higher the ranks are that you have within the government, you get treated a little better, but it's just not enough to even make it call that a life. There's just no life.
So how old were you when your family left Cuba?
I was 10 years old.
Okay.
And we went to Spain at that time. And I remember as a kid, we didn't have those things that kids had when I was 10 years old, going to a place where we had nothing, then moving to Spain, and all of a sudden you see all these kids have toys and have, for me and my brother, this was like, wow, this is the greatest thing, because we had nothing like that. It was a culture shock for us.
Wow. So what made your father, he left for the American dream,
right?
You said, but how did he even know? How did he get the news of what it was like in other places?
Well, back then there was a lot of people traveling back and forth to Cuba. Back when before Castro, the Batista time, people would go back and forth to Cuba, and they would just communicate and tell everybody how it was in the United States. My father wanted to leave Cuba more so because of political reason, and they knew that coming to the United States was the place to go.
What was your dad's job in Cuba?
My father was a carpenter, maintenance manager at a brewery in Havana.
Okay, so he was in Havana. He had, I guess that's a decent job, right?
Yeah, that was a very good job. Yes.
And he still thought he should leave.
absolutely. 'Cause
What was the writing on the wall that made him say, I need to go?
the writing on the wall was basically, when Castro declared himself a communist, and he kind of knew the writing was on the wall that this guy was communist, and everybody, no one wants communism, and so we were the fortunate few that were able to get out before things got really bad. Although things were pretty bad by the time we left, but that was his biggest thing. He didn't want anything to do with communism.
So let me ask you this. Speaking of communism, we hear a lot today about America moving in that direction. So we talked about education in Cuba. Let's talk about now the student loan forgiveness and free education in America. Having seen what free education gets you in Cuba, do you believe that free education is a fair trade-off for communism?
Absolutely. There's free education. You have such a huge percentage of the population that went to school, graduated college, paid their student loans, and now all of a sudden you have this group of people that all they want is their tuitions to be paid for. That's just incredible. You apply for this loan. Now you're going to hold somebody else accountable for that debt, and that's just not fair. It just isn't. It's just not fair at all.
So it goes beyond.
It goes beyond
the government and the Cuban education system.
Absolutely. If you go to school and then all of a sudden your debt is paid for, that means that you don't have a horse in this race anymore. Now it's like, oh, it's paid for, and now I don't have to work. I don't have to do anything. Eventually the government will continue to take care of me.
Well, I think that's an interesting question because you see a lot of people that have high school free, they don't go.
Right.
And then they graduate, they eventually need to work somewhere. They get a job at McDonald's,
right.
And you have to give them a minimum wage so that they can afford to live,
right.
Because they never went to school.
Right.
And now you're going to give them free college. If they didn't care enough to go to high school that was free.
That's the point.
Why are we going to add college?
That's the point.
Okay, so that's one point. Did your dad ever teach you about the government in Cuba? You were young when you left. Were you aware?
Well, I was aware that things were bad in Cuba. We just couldn't. We had to stand in line for a loaf of bread, long lines. By the time we got to the end of the line, there was probably no bread left. It was always a struggle on trying to find food, but that was back in the late '60s. So things have gotten, 100 times worse by now. But yeah, then after we left that system, now going to Spain, and then being able to go to a store and buy things, at random, that's how my father and mother would teach me. Hey, you didn't have this in Cuba. Don't take this for granted. So we never did.
Did they teach you? Did they connect it to government, or was it just life in general?
It's life in general. We were too young
to
understand. My understanding came after as I got older, and my father would. He would sit with me and talk to me about and tell me stories about how things were in Cuba when he was at a younger age, and some of the things that he went through to get us out of Cuba, because he was punished pretty bad.
For what was he punished?
He was once you were classified as a person that was against the government, you were watched, and there were occasions where they came to the house, knocking the door down,
wow.
Taking him, arresting him, wanting him to testify and talk about why is he against the government and stuff like that. They did that quite often.
Was he actually against the government, or did?
Oh,
What are the levels of here's a model citizen for the government, and here's a guy that's against the government? Are there shades of gray in between? Can your neighbor say you're against the government and you get in trouble?
Yeah, you're either with the government or you're not. And so if they know that you're not, you're constantly watched. And there's every block had a watcher that would report every little move that you made. If they saw you leaving your house at 2 o'clock in the morning for whatever reason, they wanted to know the next day why were you out in the street at 2 o'clock in the morning. That kind of stuff.
Wow, so right away.
Yeah, right away. It was it's how do they how do they squash the opposition, and that goes from any level in government to down to the bottom. They want to know exactly what you're doing and trying to squash.
So when you see like social media is telling people, they're removing posts, they're deciding this is good, this is not good, and things like that, and they're making decisions. And of course, you can say that they're not linked closely to the government, but when they're testing facial recognition software and eye scan software
Right.
and all these things, clearly they have some government funding and they're doing some kind of work
Right.
for the government. When you see that kind of censorship
Mm-hmm.
going on here, does it make you think of Cuba?
Oh, absolutely. That is there's a communist hand behind the whole thing, because this is a free country. We have freedom of speech. You should be able to talk about and say anything that you want to say, but as long as you're not hurting other people. But you should be able to talk and talk free about anything, any topic. And the fact that you have these social media companies censoring what you're saying is, I'm not sure that it's them, but somebody is navigating that ship and telling them, hey, you got to do this, because we need to put a halt on this.
Right, because what is their vested interest in doing
They have
that?
no vested interest in it, but somebody is manipulating. I mean, look at Zuckerberg. He just talked about how the FBI was coercing him into squashing some of the Hunter Biden laptop information. Somebody is telling these companies what to do.
And still they won't let Zuckerberg into China with his Facebook.
There you go.
So over the past couple of years, you mentioned food lines in Cuba.
Right.
Now, toilet paper, baby formula,
Yes.
fuel. We're talking about fuel.
Yeah.
And if you don't have fuel, you can't run the trucks to get the food to the stores,
Yeah.
to get other products to the stores. And there's the fertilizer, so the farmers can't make enough food and can't get it to the trucks. Are you feeling like there's something eerily similar, or do you think it's coincidence?
No, there's a lot, things are really bad in Cuba. There's no, it's not like you can just go to the gas station and pump your car with gasoline and move on. That doesn't work that way. It's all in contraband. Who has a gallon of gasoline for a couple of potatoes and that kind of stuff. That's how things work in Cuba. It's just everything is contraband. Here you're starting to see this whole thing. Like our oil. Why do we have to be dependent on some other country who can possibly pump oil any cleaner than we can?
Right.
Why do we have to be dependent on them when we can be totally dependent on ourselves? And it just doesn't add up. These things don't add up. The system here, and all of these politicians should know, everything evolves around oil. If you get all these leases approved and get the oil pumping, prices will come down, the trucking industry would flourish, the supply chain would flourish, and everything would go back to normal. But they're just trying to somehow, because of power, because that's what they want. They want the power to manipulate everybody else. And the more people they make dependent on them, the more power they have.
And that's like a familiar tune for
Oh,
you.
that's very familiar. Absolutely, they just want the power. Look at 90% of the population in Cuba is a government employee. The working population.
Okay, so, and this is very interesting to me, and I just got the sign that we have to take a break, so we're going to take a break, but when we come back, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about working for the government from 2020 to 2022, and all these people that are not working. So we'll be right back with more Hector Garcia. Thank you.
Aloha! Joe Silva here with Kukua Technologies. I'm excited to see you on Tuesdays on Morning Coffee for our tech tips.
Let's face it, lawyers get a bad rap. I'm Erin Brucey, host of Legal Breakdown, where we dissect legal topics for the everyday viewer, with a mix of interesting guests to talk about current events and hot legal topics. Let's work together to make the law accessible and relevant to everyone. Catch us every week on RVN Television.
Welcome back to Have You Heard with Heather Darling and today's guest, Hector Garcia. So Hector, when we went to break, we were talking about people in Cuba. 90% of the Cuban people work for the government when your dad left and brought your family to America. So do you see any similarities over the last 2 years when from 2020 people were being paid by our government to stay home, and thereafter when things reopened, the economy reopened, they were still paid to stay home? Now we have people that are coming across the border from Mexico that's open. They're not allowed to work because no employer can hire them legally. An employer would get fined if they hired them. We have all these minimum wage requirements. Do you feel like people now in America are being paid by the government to work or not work?
It's all about creating that dependency on the government. If we're dependent on the government, the more power they have, and the bigger the government gets, and that's the key for them. That's how it was in Cuba. The government supported everybody. 90%, and I want to emphasize this: 90% of the working class in Cuba work for the government, and they're totally dependent on the government to supply. There's people that have come here from Cuba as of recent years, and they come here and they expect the same thing. It's not the same. They're not the same Cubans that came back in my time, back in the 70s, but these Cubans that are here now. They just want the same thing that they were getting in Cuba, that totally government dependency. So you have all these the open borders. All of these people that are coming here from all different countries, not just Mexico, from all these different countries from South America and Central America, even from Europe. There's people here coming from all over the place. They're coming here looking for the same things that they were getting in their country.
That they left.
So they left misery, so they want to come here and implement the same misery here. So they come here looking for the same handouts that the government, because the handouts here are a lot greater than handouts in their countries. So being poor here is a lot easier than being poor in South America.
It has been,
right?
And that might be changing.
So, but it's all about creating a total government dependency for their power.
So you told me one time about the rolling blackouts and brownouts in Cuba.
Right.
What did you think when you heard about these rolling blackouts that were going to happen in California?
Well, there's a joke between my friends and I. We call it the People's Republic of California, because California has become, out of all of the states, become the worst when it comes to a dictatorship, basically, where you have politicians just calling the shots, and you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, you're not allowed to charge your electric vehicle. You're not allowed to.
That you had to buy.
That you had to buy because they're saying in 2035 they want to be there's going to be nothing but electric cars, or no gasoline cars allowed. So it's just crazy how they have these dictators, in our government are just copying from the Marxist playbook.
Do you think that the American people actually understand what it's like when the power is routinely cut and stuff? Do you think that most people are paying attention to that and know what that's going to be?
I think a lot of people are paying attention, but there's still a lot of people that are fooled, and they're told a story why this is happening. They always put the blame on someone else for what's happening, but the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of people that are being fooled to believe this kind of stuff.
So food shortages, if that happens, if the trucking really doesn't if it's not moving and the food's not moving, do you think the American people really are ready for food shortages? Do you think that today's society can handle that?
If I can tell you that if we came across food shortages anywhere near the kinds of food shortages that we had in Cuba, this would be chaotic. Here in this country would be chaotic because people are not used to that. People are here. You're used to getting up in the morning. You want a cup of coffee. You go to the store. You get yourself a cup of coffee, and then that's the end of the day. But no, if that was the case here, where how things were in Cuba, this would be chaotic here because people do not know what to do. Would not know what to do when those shortages happen.
So in Cuba, if I don't have food, I go knock on your door. You're not going to give me your food because you don't know when you're going to get more food. Do I violently break in and take your food, or do I wait until you leave your house and go in and take your food?
Crime, that's one of the things that food shortages will bring. Crime will go through the roof because people are desperate, and desperate times creates desperate measures. So there would be, it just be such chaotic times when crime would be on an all-time high.
See, what's interesting to me is we have people who came here from much more difficult societies. They were dealing with food crisis in Cuba. They know how to get it. They were dealing with it in South America. They know how to get it. We've seen the violence on TV. They know how to get it. I do not personally believe, and I know that this is your story, not mine, but I personally do not believe that the American people are ready to fight that way.
No way.
To get that food. They're not, let's say they're 6 months, even if it's 6 months before they learn that that struggle is sincere, I think that those 6 months, there's going to be a ton of issues where, somebody else is going to be living in somebody's house.
Right. See, and all of these other countries that are coming here, they're all used to the struggle. Like
that's what I'm saying.
They're
right.
used to the struggle, but here, I just can't see.
We've had it soft.
Yeah, we have it very, very easy.
I mean, my whole life, I don't think that I've wanted. My father taught me, but I don't think that I've wanted. Right. So now you are seeing here that things, I guess, are like what you saw when you were a child on a much smaller level.
Right. Totally. Yeah, it's coming slowly, and it's all about the power, government power, and creating more dependency.
I mean, it's funny because you're saying if you're a loyalist, you can get a better job here. You cannot get a job because you said a certain thing on your social media and it's there forever and somebody saw it, and we have the cancel culture and all these things. So, here you see this cancel culture. Does that fit those narratives as well?
That's all. It's all part of the same recipe. All part of the same recipe. When it comes to CRTs teaching, indoctrinating children, because that's what they're doing. I remember when I was only 8 years old, where they tried to teach me that Castro's system was the right thing, and how they did that, and it was just a total indoctrination. When I remember telling my parents, and they were just appalled about it. And so I see this here, trying to teach and brainwash little children. That is it's just wrong. It's just absolutely wrong. So you catch up them when they're young. By the time they go to high school, they're just totally different group. And by the time they go to college, forget it. They're in a total lost world.
And we've seen it in other societies.
Absolutely.
Not just in Cuba.
Oh yeah, it's happened. But it's all part of the same rhetoric.
What about news? Do you feel like news stations are reporting news or stories?
No, the news channels here, and I can name them I can go down the list. There are all opinion channels, and again, I can tell you that these channels, this TV stations, network stations, are controlled by someone else. Someone else is manning that puppet and letting them. This is what you need to cover. This is how you need to cover. This is what you need to say. This is how you say it. You have all the free stations that will not do that, but you have to pay attention to those things.
So, And I could ask you questions about this forever because it's very interesting to me, but I got the wrap it up sign. So, you know, we have an election coming up. This show is going to air next week. It's going to air on Monday and Tuesday, and the election is Tuesday. Having seen what you saw in Cuba and seeing what you see here in America today, do you have a message for the American people who are going to be going to the polls to vote that might be watching this and might be choosing their elected representatives based on something you say? Is there a message you have for them?
Oh, absolutely. You have to be aware of where these people come from. What is their message? What is it that they're telling you? Always remember that the truth hurts, but it's the truth. And a lot of times you have these politicians that they sugarcoat things and they try to tell you what they're going to give you. Any politician that tells you that I'm going to give you this, you better run as far as you can from that politician, because nothing is for free. Eventually, you're going to pay for it. All this whole inflation thing that's going on now, and how we're paying for so much money for everything that we buy, there's a reason for that. Do you know what the reason is? Is all of the free money that was given during COVID and all the free money that's been given today. That's what is caused all this inflation. And the more money they give away, the more inflation we're going to have. So that's my message. Watch who you're voting for.
Hector, I want to thank you for coming on the show again. For you know, I think there's a lot that people don't know, and maybe it's because some people were never taught it. They were busy working. But also young people don't know because of what you said. They're being taught certain things in school that these systems are wonderful, when maybe these systems are not so wonderful now that we're seeing them here. So I appreciate your coming in. I appreciate your being on the show. And look forward, maybe one day we'll have you come back and share some other experiences.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for tuning in today. And we'll see you next week on Have You Heard with Heather Darling.